Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this release of another ANUpoll. For those of you who don't remember, since it's a little while since we did the last one, this is a quarterly survey of Australian public opinion. The seventh one focuses on public opinion about population growth in Australia. It was devised and analysed by Ian McAllister here, by Juliet, Pietsch and Aaron Martin at the School of Political Science and International Relations at ANU. It looked at Australian attitudes towards population policy, employment and infrastructure, immigration, fertility and the ageing population. From my point of view, I guess one could argue that it's one of the most important policy issues for Australia in the 20th century. The size of our population will underpin and have an effect on most aspects of our life. It will shape our economic growth and our potential. It will shape the infrastructure that we put in place to meet the needs of whatever the population happens to be. And it will ask us to at least analyse and critique ourselves much of what we take for granted in our society. So we thought it was appropriate that the first ANUpoll for 2010, the seventh in the series, deals with this important policy issues. Like previous ANUpolls, the study sheds new light on public opinion about a major policy topic that will shape Australia's future development. It helps us at the ANU fulfil our national mission, and I might remind you that part of our brief as the federal government's university is to address topics of national importance, and it's a goal that's particularly important to us at the institution. It's one that we believe we have an absolute obligation to meet. The ANUpoll also differs from other opinion polls by placing the public opinions generated from the poll in a broad policy context and by benchmarking Australian attitudes against international opinions when similar questions are asked elsewhere. Like a lot of what we do at ANU, the poll is designed to inform public debate, inform public opinion, and hopefully to elevate the public debate on these important topics by putting information out there and making it available to people who want to enter the debate or at least come to understand some of these important topics. We hope also, of course, it will inform the policy debate and we hope that it will assist the next burst of scholarly research in this area. It builds on the ANU's tradition of social survey research, which has been a part of us since our date of birth, the 1st of August 1946. I hope that this ANUpoll therefore contributes to a greater understanding of the issues that do surround and underpin Australia's population debate. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you Professor Ian McAllister. He will talk in much more detail, as will my colleagues here from ANU, talk in much more detail about some of the results in the poll. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. I'll speak briefly about the headline results from the poll, and then I'll pass on to my colleague Juliet and then Aaron Martin, who will speak about other sections of the poll. As Ian mentioned, the purpose of the ANUpoll is to really drill down into public opinion, to look at the reasons and explanations why people hold certain attitudes. And in this poll we were interested in looking at the whole issue of population and population growth. Now, in prior times, the issue of population has really been entangled with debates about immigration. And what we really wanted to do was to look at population as a particular public policy topic. That started off last year when the Treasury produced a report which predicted a population mid-century in Australia of about 36 million. And then, as you know, Kevin Rudd, the then Prime Minister, supported the idea of Big Australia, and he was followed by various government ministers. So we were interested in what the public thought about all of this and then trying to explain those attitudes. In terms of the headline result from the poll, we find that 52% of the people we interviewed opposed a larger population, 44% of people favoured a larger population, and just 4% of the people that we interviewed in the poll had no opinion. Now that's broadly in line with what we find in other surveys that have been conducted over the last 6 months or so, namely that there's a majority, either a slim majority or a large majority, who are not in favour of increasing the size of the Australian population. What we then did in the poll was we tried to give some explanation for why people favoured or why people opposed population growth. What we found in terms of people that favoured population growth, the arguments they put forward were mainly economic. They were looking for economic growth, they were looking for more skills, and also to some extent they were in favour of greater cultural diversity. In terms of the reasons people gave for opposing population growth, we found that they tended to be much more diverse. They tended to be things that affected people's day-to-day living standards, the cost of housing, transport, shortage of water, urban overcrowding, and so on. So the objections people had to population growth tended to be very practical things that affected their day-to-day lives, and they weren't based on principle as such. We also asked people in the survey a series of questions about the effect of population growth in the environment, and we also benchmarked that with a similar survey that was carried out last year in the United Kingdom. What we found was the majority of people we interviewed thought the world population was too large and it was causing environmental damage. And the Australian results from that were very much in line with the results from the previous British survey. When we asked people about the effect of population growth on the Australian environment, we found that people were much more divided. 35% of the people we interviewed said the population could be higher and wouldn't cause environmental damage. At the other end of the scale, 31% of people thought the population was too high and was causing damage. Now again, that's very much in contrast to the figures from the British survey, where 7 out of the 10 people that were interviewed thought that the population, a larger population, was causing environmental damage. And we also asked a series of questions about family size and the extent to which people should restrict their family size to stop environmental damage. Opinions were very much divided on that. About half the people that were interviewed thought that people should restrict the number of children they have to stop environmental damage, and the same proportion took an opposite view. So I'll pass on to Juliet, who will talk about immigration and fertility.
Thanks, Professor McAllister. I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail about some of those findings that Professor McAllister has just mentioned. First, the poll looked at questions of immigration and fertility, and we looked at why is this so important. First, levels of fertility have been declining since the 1970s, so now we have a situation where fertility rates are below the level that leads to replacement of one generation by the next. This means that over time, with declining fertility levels, labour shortages and an ageing population, how we address the need for generational replacement will become very important. So the poll asked whether people favoured population growth through fertility or immigration. What we found was that up to 52% of the population favoured population growth through fertility, 16% through immigration, and 23% through both. If Australia was to focus on immigration as the main source of population growth, this poll found more support for skilled migrants who could contribute directly to the economy. For example, 35% reported support for skilled migrants, 21% for family migrants, and 21% for refugees. So why is there less support for immigration? The poll showed that concerns are mainly about infrastructure and the economy, rather than cultural diversity or a general fear of difference. So Australians are becoming less concerned about national identity and racial homogeneity, and more concerned about social and economic infrastructure. For example, among those who opposed population growth, 53% were concerned about the cost of housing, 52% were concerned about loss of skills training. For water restrictions, 45%, urban congestion, 45%, environmental stress, 45%, and unemployment, 35%. Now, some of these concerns tend to be felt more strongly among particular groups in Australia. For example, Australians on low incomes and those working in non-professional occupations are more concerned about higher levels of unemployment and a potential loss of skills training opportunities. We find that older people are more worried about water shortages, and younger people tend to be more worried about the stress on the natural environment. Despite some of these concerns, as Ian mentioned, there's quite a bit of support for population growth, which we found was 44%. Among those who are supportive, 38% say we need more people for economic growth, 33% say we need more skilled migrants for the workforce, another 33% suggest that Australia could do more with cultural diversity, and between 16 and 20% say an increased population would counteract the ageing of the population and would support property prices. Those most supportive of population growth tend to be migrants themselves and also second-generation immigrants. The poll also finds that Australians born in Asia are more than twice as likely as those born in Europe to support population growth. And I think this is quite a significant finding, given that the latest ABS figures show that 41% of arrivals in Australia are indeed from Asia. And I might hand you over now to Aaron, and then later we can discuss what this means for population policy and perhaps the population strategy more generally.
Okay, thanks to everyone for being here today. So one of the most important aspects of the population debate has to do with the ageing of the population. As all of us in this room know, the population is ageing, and this will create certain demographic pressures that governments in the future will have to face. More generally, the issue taps into broader questions regarding the role of government. Advanced democracies like Australia have, on the whole, done a good job at providing basic services to citizens over the last 60 years, and the relationship between the state and citizens has been a good one, at least historically speaking. So we wanted to know whether there is a concern that demographic pressures may strain this relationship in the future, so we asked about this in the poll. And what we found was that 68% of respondents think that the ageing population will cause Australia problems in the future. Moreover, the public are even more concerned about the healthcare system's ability to cope with increased demand. An astoundingly low 22% of respondents believe that the healthcare system will be able to cope with the ageing population. And healthcare was rated as the second most important problem facing the country after the economy. As to how we're going to pay for the costs associated with the ageing population, there was also divided opinion. Perhaps not surprisingly, a majority, 56%, oppose increasing taxes to pay for the costs associated with the ageing population. A slightly larger number, 59%, think that the government will have to cut programs and welfare spending. And on balance, there is more support for individuals rather than the government funding retirement. Now, none of this is to suggest that Australians are against big government. In the survey, a full 68% agreed that there is more the government should be doing, and only 28% agreed that the less government, the better. So many Australians support big government, but there seems to be real concerns about the government's ability to play a larger role in dealing with the ageing population, especially in regards to healthcare. So despite not yet being an immediate problem, the challenges posed by the ageing population don't seem far from the front of people's minds, and it seems that beyond our immediate optimism, there is some concern about the future in regards to the ageing population and the role of government. And there will continue to be discussion about this in the future, but as Ian Chubb was saying, the ANUpoll hopes to inform educated debate around the subject. Thank you.
So we'd be happy to take any questions that people might have.
Just on the immigration versus fertility debate, do you think that the continued dialogue about boats and refugee policy, and I guess the scaremongering or so-called scaremongering by some politicians, has had an impact on people wanting fertility more as a population growth method than immigration?
I think our survey hasn't actually gone into how people feel about the asylum seeker issue. However, there could be concerns about the initial adjustment period when immigrants first arrive, which is perhaps the reason why people are favouring fertility as an option. But we can't really go into that in this poll necessarily, but that could be a concern.
You mentioned about how racial identity seems to be less of a concern to people, right? But when you look at it, it doesn't matter if a person is born here or flies here, they're going to add to infrastructure problems, economy, things to do with, it's another mouth to feed, whichever way you look at it. Do you think, though, people are hiding behind concerns about the environment and the economy to say they don't like immigrants? Is there a bit of a gravity effect type of thing going on here?
I think that's a really interesting question. But what we found is that people are certainly much more worried about the cost of housing and infrastructure concerns than what they are about cultural diversity or having too much cultural diversity. And I think this has certainly changed over time, so this is what we find to be quite interesting. Your question about fertility, yes, we can't really answer that with this particular poll, unfortunately. We might need to follow that up with another study to look at why people are favouring fertility. As I said, it could be more just to do with the fact that there are more adjustment costs, but as you say, there are also costs in children, so I can't really answer that second part of the question.
You've tracked a big fall in the main worry being the economy over the last 12-18 months, which would have been the biggest surprise. I'm just wondering what the tracking has been on immigration over that time. You note here that it's jumped 6 points between your last poll, but further back, was it a small background or slightly large background that's now just rising?
It's always been a small background issue. Generally what happens when people are concerned about the economy, when there's economic constraints and so on, they focus on that. The management of the economy, unemployment, taxation and so on. Whenever the economy is doing well, people focus really on quality of life issues, things that affect their everyday lives and so on, the environment, climate change. To some extent, health and education. The previous high point when people were concerned about the economy was in the early 90s, and were particularly concerned about unemployment in the end of the Hawke period. That really squeezed out a lot of other issues. And what we've seen since, except for the 08-09 period with the global financial crisis, was that a lot of the secondary issues have really taken first stage, and particularly health and education, and to a lesser extent the environment and climate change.
Do you think if interest rates continue to go up, it will impact, how people feel about population even more? Because 53%, said housing-related issues were the reason why they weren't in favour of population growth. So do you think that if interest rates rise, it will continue to rise in terms of favouring a larger population?
I'm going to hand that one to
The critical driver behind the economy is unemployment. And in all the surveys we've conducted, particularly the Australian election survey over more than 20 years, people are most concerned about their economic circumstances in terms of high unemployment rate. If they're very worried about that, then that affects how they think about politics and a whole range of other issues. Interest rates obviously does affect people's day-to-day lives, but it's not the critical thing. Risk of unemployment to the person themselves or to a family member is the thing that really drives their opinions.
Was there any breakdown difference between metro and regional respondents? Once you go outside the big cities, a lot of people are actually afraid of their towns dying because everyone's moving to the big smoke.
There is a bit of a difference, not perhaps as much as you might think. It's quite a methodologically difficult thing to do to compare states and compare metro and non-metro and so on. But we did find that people who were living in metro areas were more concerned about issues of overcrowding in cities, as you might expect, transport problems, cost of housing and so on, compared to people that were living in non-metro and rural areas. But the difference really wasn't huge.
Is it fair to say Australians want to shut the gap on migrants?
People's attitudes towards migration correlates very strongly with the performance of the economy. If the economy is doing very well, people are quite open to migration. If the economy is doing badly, they're less open to it. And again, there's a lot of research on this over a long period of time which shows that to be the case. At the present time, people are moderately open to migration. Now, the interesting thing is, when we ask the questions about population growth, people are much more in favour of seeing that coming about through fertility rather than migration. Now that actually contrasts quite strongly with the reality, because the reality is fertility is declining across all the established nations. And in fact, if there is to be population growth, it really has to come about through immigration. So there's an issue there, I think, that political leaders really have to deal with in terms of getting information out there. But by and large, in Australia, until relatively recently, immigration was a bipartisan issue. It was not discussed to any great extent between major political parties. And even at the present time, there is a degree of bipartisanship on the mainstream immigration programme, not obviously on the refugee and asylum seeker issue. But immigration as a means of driving Australia's population is not something that's an issue of contention between the major political parties.
How was the poll of the 1,200 people done? And just with regards to the question about too much cultural diversity already, does that show that of the 52% of people who said that they didn't want to increase the population, that 3 in 10 are racist?
No. It says what the question said, which was that I strongly agreed or disagreed with the proposition to do with cultural diversity.
But then 28%, is that 28% of people of those 52% said that there was too much cultural diversity?
No, we asked that question of everyone. Is this the preliminary question?
It's the 8 different questions asked to either group.
Oh, sorry, yes, the reasons we did, yes, we separated the sample, we filtered them, and we asked the people who were in favour of population growth, 2 questions, and the people who were opposed.
So it shows that 3 in 10 are racist,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It shows that they responded to that question on a scale of 1 to 5, strongly agreed, strongly disagreed.
Right. Sorry, can you explain that a bit more?
Well, the question was, you're looking at one, having more people means more cultural diversity?
It's on page 5.
What page are we on? Oh, I see, yeah. Yeah, I was looking at the frequencies in the back, which is on page 2021. We gave people a series of statements, and then he could respond to that on a 5-point scale from strongly agree through to strongly disagree. And the question I think you were addressing is when we ask people a statement, we have too much cultural diversity already. And that's just exactly what it means. Is there too much cultural diversity and people either strongly agree or strongly disagree? So
as Andrew said, they want to shut the gate. Is that what that means then?
It means precisely what it says, that they thought there was too much cultural diversity and they didn't want any more.
But you don't think that reflects xenophobic nature in a proportion of the public?
And how was the poll done?
The poll was done by telephone. It was done before the federal election. It was representative of the population aged 18 and over of all states and territories in Australia, so it was a national population sample.
With your questions on the ageing of the population, was there any question about whether increasing migration is a way of expanding the tax base and helping government pay for the ageing population?
We didn't address those 2 things. We addressed them separately, but not together. Okay. Yeah.
We did ask people the question, would you agree or disagree that taxation should be increased to deal with the issue of the ageing population? Not surprisingly, we found the majority said we would. Now, obviously, asking questions about taxation really quite difficult. If you do it properly, you've got to have trade-offs and say, well, if you give more tax to ageing population, there'll be less tax available for things like, say, health and education and so on. So asking people a question about extra taxation to deal with the problem, quite often people say yes, unless there's a trade-off against something else.
Was this survey done before or after we had a population minister?
It was done just after, I think.
Do you think that's had an impact on the way people feel about the population and their thoughts about policy around it?
I think people are much more informed about policy now because of that debate than they were in the past. And one of the things we noticed in the survey was relatively few people said they didn't have an opinion or they didn't know. So, for example, the main question they asked about whether there should be population, people favoured or opposed population growth, only 4% of people said they didn't have an opinion. In the context of opinion surveys, that's actually a really very low figure. And it led us to believe that people were picking up a lot of the information we're seeing in the public debate, so they were being better informed. It also suggests to us that population as a political issue probably won't go away, certainly in the medium term, unless something disastrous happens to the economy. That these are things people are concerned about, and they do see it in the context of things that happen to them in their everyday lives, getting to work, cost of housing, cost of living, and so on.
Do you see there seems to be no sort of contradictions in what people are saying. Like, you've got 16% of people saying we won't increase population through immigration, but 50% agree that we need still migrants for the workforce, which is obviously going to have to import labour. More population could boost the housing industry, help support property crisis and things like that. I mean,
There is a bit of a contradiction there, as I mentioned before, in the sense that if the economy is to grow and the population is to grow, it almost certainly would have to come through immigration because fertility levels are dropping. One of the interesting things is, as I mentioned, immigration is not an issue that's been publicly debated over a long period of time. So the public's not necessarily particularly well informed about all of the arguments for and against. The interesting thing, as I mentioned in the previous question, is population growth. We can tend to understand that a bit better than the immigration debate. And I think one of the reasons is because it's something they see every day and it does affect their day-to-day lives. And also to some extent because of the debate starting at the end of last year with the Treasury report, which focused people's minds. And then when you get the Prime Minister saying he's in favour of big Australia, whereas senior ministers, that focuses people's attention on. And population growth is something that people can come to grips with in a much more direct way than the debate about immigration.
but let's face it, though, a cute white Anglo-Saxon baby is what it is in the sort of Republic than a black migrant who can't speak much English, but it's essentially creating, as I was saying before, it's essentially another mouth to feed.
I'm not sure that it's easy.
Construction and stuff.
I'm not sure that it's easy to sell that to the public because we've got all the issues of trying to sell having more children to women. I don't necessarily agree that that's an easy issue to deal with as opposed to
people feel uncomfortable, perhaps.
But that's certainly what some of these findings are showing, that people are more comfortable with fertility, but I'm not sure that they're more comfortable with the idea of having more children as opposed to having more immigrants. I think they're two very complex issues that people have to deal with.
Just looking at I've only just found these tables at the back which show the strongly agree and the agree, etc., etc. It actually shows that a whopping overwhelming number of people agree that the cost of housing is too high. It's 89%, not just 53. Only 53 strongly agree, but 89% agree. So why did you choose to put just the strongly agree in front when it's overwhelmingly obvious that a lot of these questions have a lot of people agree?
What we were trying to do is rank them a bit to give some perspective on it, so that's the reason. And the reason we put the detailed tables in the back is so people can actually see exactly what the figures are in terms of the numbers of respondents, the percentage and so on. It's all actually there. The data set will also be deposited in the social science data archives at ANU, and that's what we do with all those data sets, if anybody actually wants to use them. A lot of this is used for subsequent academic research.
And it also shows that 51% of people agree that we have too much cultural diversity. I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on that one. What on earth is too much cultural diversity exactly? Who came up with that question? It sounds like you're asking people, are they xenophobic?
No, it's not. There's a long series of questions in the surveys conducted over a long period of time when people ask about multiculturalism. And it shows the same type of attitudes. Multiculturalism, as well as cultural diversity, is something that's very complex. And what we wanted to try and get was the idea that people were in favour or opposed as part of the population growth debate for something that was non-economic, not cultural diversity. So that's why the question was framed like that.
So I guess are those people saying then if people do come here, then they should be like us rather than bring their own cultural diversity?
Some people are saying that, not everybody.
The 53, is it 53%? 51%? Is that what they're saying? Like, that they don't want cultural diversity, so if people do come here...
We don't want more cultural
Yeah.
diversity, they see it as a reason for opposing population growth. I mean, the interesting thing is there's a range of opinions. I don't think we should focus solely on the cultural diversity argument, because the main reasons that people put forward for opposing or favouring population growth are really to do with economics, to do with economic circumstances. Now, the implication of that is that if politicians or governments want to move the population growth debate on, they need to address much more the infrastructure needs of the population, because people are concerned about the cost of housing, urban overcrowding, transport, and so on. These are things that are eminently fixable. People are not opposed to population growth on principle. It's to do with the effect it will have on their day-to-day lives, and getting around, their day-to-day living. That's the interesting thing, I think, in the policy implication behind this.
How was the population sampled? This isn't just our grandparents, because they were the only ones at home to answer the phone call at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon.
No, the survey is done by telephone, and it uses the technique called random digit dialing, which is what most of the survey companies use. The survey, when it's completed, is then weighted to represent the general population. Now, you're correct in that there's always an over-representation of people who have to be at home to answer the telephone. So there's no representation of women, children, and so on, and older people. We then weight the data to represent the general population. That's a standard technique.
Was there questions at all on where people want the come from, either or Asian, European, American?
We didn't ask that.